When I was a kid, I loved platformers. I mean, who didn't? But I was strictly a Nintendo fan. I didn't really get into PlayStation until later on and caught up on the Sony titles I missed, like Ratchet and Clank. But there's still a bunch of games on Xbox that I just never played. Now, when I say Xbox platformer, you probably think of Blink's The Time Sweeper. It was one of the few games in the genre actually published by Microsoft. But they did publish another platforming game only 1 year later called Voodoo Vince. Developed by Beep Industries working closely with Microsoft, Voodoo Vince released on the Xbox in late 2003, a time when the console was running pretty dry on exclusive platforming titles. While Sony and Nintendo had a strong selection of platformers, the Xbox didn't really have much more than Blink's. It was up to Beep Industries to remedy that by developing Voodoo Vince. Phil Spencer of Microsoft would even go on to say that it's his favorite game he's ever got to work on. This is a man who's been involved with Fable, Halo, and Gears of War, and out of all that, he picks Voodoo Vince. Dang, it must be good. But just because he has fond memories developing the game doesn't necessarily mean that we're sitting on gold here. I've never heard of this game, so why don't we check it out? I better get used to using this thing because, like, the next 5 games I'm doing are on Xbox. Cool. While every other platformer I've reviewed tends to start with a pre-rendered cutscene, Voodoo Vince unusually treats us to something on-engine. I suppose they were either confident enough with the in-game graphics, or they couldn't afford a team to make the CG for them. Either way, the plot of the game is as follows. 2 cronies break into a voodoo shop run by an older woman named Madame Charmaine, hoping to steal some voodoo dust. Failing to stop them, Madame Charmaine gets herself knocked out and kidnapped by the mooks. Lucky for her, though, leftovers of the zombie dust land on Vince, bringing him to life with one mission in mind: save Madame Charmaine. The henchmen belong to some bozo named Cosmo. He plans on using the magical properties of the zombie dust to conquer the world.
What are you doing in my evil vision?
This guy is a real bozo. The instruction manual even says he's flunked out of 7th grade. And speaking of the manual, dang, this is a manual. Full color illustrations, beautiful design. As always, it's something I really gotta appreciate. Rogers Video. Warning, if tape is tampered with, customer must pay for the cost of tape. Oh no, I better not tamper with the tape. So now that we're actually playing the game, here's the down low and the controls. It's a typical platformer, meaning you've got a jump and a double jump. The X button will make Vince punch, which you can string into a 3-hit combo, and the B button does a Crash Bandicoot style spin that you can use to attack or get some extra distance out of a jump. Pressing the L button in the air will slow your descent, much like Rayman's helicopter hair. Pressing X in the air will do a ground pound, very helpful for landing on larger enemies without getting smacked around. Combat is very simple. Enemies often don't take too many hits to kill, but even if they do, or if there's a bunch overwhelming you, you can easily take them all out in one hit with a special voodoo attack. When enemies are defeated, they'll drop beads. Collecting these will fill up a special meter. Once full, you can execute the attack by pressing R and L together. Doing this will have Vince conjure something up that he can use to inflict harm on himself, whether it be pins, a saw, an anvil, etc. Being a voodoo doll, the enemies take the damage Vince has done to himself. That's the whole gimmick of the game. You hurt yourself to hurt others. Feel his pain, as if the game's cover didn't make it obvious enough. Hell, not even 2 minutes into the game, you're throwing yourself into a meat grinder. Vince escapes unharmed, but every baddie in the room? Not so much. It's a cool concept, it really is. The idea of using a voodoo doll as a weapon has a lot of potential, but the idea of being a voodoo doll has even more. But I can't really help but to feel this potential is kinda wasted. Right away, the game shows you that putting yourself in dangerous situations, a la the meat grinder, is way worse for the bad guys than it is you. But this is the only real occasion, save for a handful of others during boss fights, that you find yourself looking for something in the environment to hurt yourself with. And it's very selective too. Bottomless pits still kill Vince, but fire doesn't. And even then, being on fire doesn't hurt enemies, but is instead only used for solving puzzles that require lighting something on fire. unfortunately, the Voodoo mechanics are mostly limited to the before-mentioned super attacks. Pull the triggers, a random animation will play, and the enemies all die. You unlock more methods of mutilating our good friend Vince here by collecting voodoo icons. Each one will add another way Vince can hurt himself to hurt others. But the unfortunate thing is that it's really only adding new animations. It's not actually changing anything gameplay-wise. You could probably play the entire game with just the starting one and it wouldn't make a difference. But that's not to say unlocking and watching these animations isn't entertaining. In fact, it's part of what kept me playing. Things get as wacky as tornadoes coming to thrash him around, or drinking an entire bottle of laxative and dying from massive diarrhea. Or at least I think that's what's supposed to be going on here. The game doesn't really take full advantage of the game's gimmick until the boss fights. Each one has you desperately scouring the area for something you can use to kill yourself with, whether it be a windmill slicing you to bits or getting stuck in a train crash. These moments are really cool, but it's baffling to see this kind of potential wasted on only boss fights, especially after the beginning of the game demonstrates the potential the gimmick has. That's really the extent of the voodoo in the game. It's such a cool idea, but I find it's vastly underimplemented. But it's still a great idea, and I would love to see another game in the future or something try to take full advantage of it. But gimmicks aside, is the core gameplay good? Voodoo Vince plays like a typical collectathon game. Each level is fairly open with an objective in mind, but unlike Mario 64 or Banjo, which boast large levels with many objectives, Voodoo Vince keeps it simple with smaller open levels, each with just one. The game's a constant journey forward. Every level simply has an obstacle that's blocking your path. It could be a big mook you need to find some way to defeat, someone you'll need to barter with to pass a door, or someone you'll have to help create a path forward. The latter involve hub levels that split into multiple sub-areas, each with an item you'll have to find. For example, one level has you finding 3 ingredients for a chef. In one area, you'll catch a crawdad, another will have you collecting onions, and the last has you grinding up animals to make a sausage. Seriously though, this part is messed up. You take these critter guys, and they're just hopping around having a good time. You put them on a conveyor belt, and they just stay there. Then they land in this meat grinder. I think I kinda understand that T rating now, even if it only does say mild violence. Each level has a healthy dose of warp geometry to jump across. Many levels have hidden tunnels within the cracks and areas that would typically hide a death pit. In these areas, you can find goodies like extra lives and collectibles. The collectibles consist of bags of zombie dust that'll expand your health every 100 you collect, and power skulls, which will increase the amount of voodoo special attacks you can keep stored. About halfway through the game, you'll get an item called the All-Seeing Eye. It'll let you see the location of all collectibles in the map in first-person mode. It's really cool. It's a godsend for anyone aiming for 100% completion. The level design works really well for this kind of game. It's non-linear, but the levels are small enough not to be overwhelming, but despite their small size, they still manage to make room for secrets, making it worth exploring. There's often a great vertical depth, which Vince has no problem scaling because he has one hell of a double jump, and with the levitation move you pull off with the L button, it's a piece of cake to make precise landings. It's almost a bit too easy, honestly. Vince's moveset is geared so well for careful and precise jumping that it hardly leaves any challenge in the game. Jumping around is still fun, don't get me wrong, but I feel it would definitely benefit from being a tad more challenging. Vince also sports a grappling hook move, not unlike Rayman's ability to latch into purple lums. In fact, it's actually exactly like that. I'm really starting to think Beep Industries took a lot of inspiration from the general mechanics of Rayman 2. Overall, it's a pretty easy game, but you know what? It lacks something I find every decent platformer game I've ever reviewed has, and that is bullshit. Every decent platformer game has bullshit somewhere. Vex has it in the general level design sometimes, Scalar has it with the occasional combat, and of course, Ty the Tasmanian Tiger 3 had it with all of those racing go-kart missions and the jet plane missions. But Voodoo Vince? No, nothing. There is nothing here that had me pulling out my hair or wishing it could be less tedious or making me quit out of frustration. Absolutely nothing. It's a rare case where the things I want it to do better aren't things it's doing poorly, but instead things I think are already on the right track that could just use a little bit of sprucing up to make it even more fun. I mean, every now and then there is a vehicle section. Vince can pilot a plane, a submarine, bumper car, amongst a handful of others. They're few and far in between and changes things up just enough to give the game a little bit of variety without overstaying their welcome. I've criticized games for doing this before, notably Ty 3 with the jet plane missions. But I've also praised games for doing this too. It all depends on how you do it, so I'll describe it more like this. It's a lot less when TIE 3 makes you pilot a jet plane, and way more like when Rayman 2 lets you hop on a rocket. Instead of being tedious and far removed from the main gameplay, the pace is still fast, focused, and fun. And before you know it, they're over. Again, I feel it borrows more from the design philosophy of Rayman rather than whatever Chrome Studios thinks makes a good game. There's also this one turret section on a roller coaster in some haunted mansion, but unlike Scalers or Rayman's turret sections, yeah, it's dumb, it shouldn't be here, but it's easy. Got it on the second try when I figured out what it was I needed to do. Didn't frustrate me. And that's what a lot of these games do at one point or another. They frustrate me. But Voodoo Vince never does that. Now, humor-wise, I feel it takes more from Gex with a hint of pessimism. Vince is sarcastic and ill-mannered, all the while being slightly self-aware as a video game character, cracking one-liners that often fall flat, but in a tone that almost feels like he doesn't want to be in the game.
What now? The obligatory boss battle?
It's like the devs wrote a script and Vince thought it was dumb, but he had to do it anyway, much like Bill Murray with the Garfield movies. It's charming in a way, especially when Vince catches himself actually getting into it for once.
Yeehaw! Oh, yeehaw.
I don't mind it, but I definitely don't love it either. Lines do get repeated a lot, especially the ones that aren't witty or funny whatsoever, but I will say he's at least nowhere near as annoying as Gex could be sometimes.
Yeah, it's tail time. Tail time! Here's Gexy!
Outside of Vince's personality, the game's presentation is absolutely fantastic. There's a lot of beautiful, vibrant colors here, lots of purple. It looks great and radiates that voodoo magic vibe really well. Textures are clean and crisp. A close-up of Vince reveals the stitching of his fabric in high detail. Things can get kinda weird here and there though, shadows could be better. I mean, I'm pretty sure this is not how shadows work. There's also a stage where you solve a puzzle by changing the time of day, but despite what time it is, it always looks nighttime. Kinda lazy if you ask me. But my biggest problem with the presentation is that sometimes the game's really dark. I had to crank up the brightness on my TV just to see what I was doing at times. But bro, buddy, pal, don't even get me started on this game soundtrack. It is so good. I mean, it is so good. It's video game jazz at its absolute finest. If there's anything I'm gonna remember this game for, it's gonna be the soundtrack. Take it from me. In conclusion, Voodoo Vince is a game I had a great time playing. It is a bit on the easy side, but I never found myself frustrated with it. It is solid, but more importantly, it's consistently solid. It could have been a bit better. I mean, it could have fleshed out some of the ideas into something truly impressive and cool, but even if it didn't do what I was hoping it would do with the game mechanics, it still manages to be a great game. Out of every obscure platforming game I've reviewed in this channel, I think I got a new favorite right here. This is one of the most underrated games I've ever played. Seriously, if you have an Xbox original, find a copy of this game and play it. I don't think many people played it when it first came out because I don't think it sold super well, so I think it's high time that changed. Microsoft should put this on Xbox Live or something. I think that'd be a good idea.
Vince, the voodoo doll, you're gonna feel full when he has lunch. A voodoo doll, you're gonna feel bad when he goes crunch against the wall. He's a hero who's just 10 inches tall.
Really hope my dad doesn't mind that I ruined his Jackson Brown tape for this video.